Hi, so in this lecture, I will more formally introduce the concept of large language models, which are a subset of generative AI that this class will be using the most. After discussing what LLMs are, I will propose a specific protocol that we should agree to use every time we consider using generative AI during any part of the composing process, at least for this semester. I'll explain my rationale for developing this protocol, explain the steps you should use, and then I will, in a later video, provide an example of what this might look like more formally. So, in the first week of class, we watched a video and read about the impact of GenAI on writing and the workplace. When I asked you all for your hot takes on GenAI, I got an incredible variety of responses. Given the common thread of Englishness that unites this group, I was surprised at this diversity of thought. Some marveled at the possibilities it holds for example, streamlining and improving healthcare diagnostic procedures. Others worried about the way it might prevent younger students from developing necessary thinking and writing skills. Some noticed its capacity to lessen the grunt work for entry-level employees while simultaneously noticing that it may simply decrease or eliminate entry-level positions from the job market. Still, others considered its impact on creative fields, wondering how we will come to see the role of the human being in artistic creation. Your responses truly ran the gamut of concerns and excitement. Among the diversity of responses, I noticed some common threads. Specifically, many recognize that human actors using the tool hold the power to use it responsibly or not. The tool itself may not be inherently good or bad. The people who wield GenAI must consider the moral, ethical, social, political, and other implications of its use. In this class, I hope, and in your courses going forward, we will seriously consider our individual responsibility to use technology in ways that benefit humans. Look, as a former philosophy major, I recognize how potentially useless this statement is given the ambiguity of the concept of human benefit. Arguably, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's 1945 deal to be friendly with Saudi Arabia benefited the lives of Americans and led to a certain kind of American prosperity. This benefit simultaneously led to a great deal of upheaval and instability in the Middle East, in particular Afghanistan. All the benefits we've enjoyed are arguably at the expense of any semblance of order, rule of law, infrastructure, prosperity, and opportunity for the people of Afghanistan. But I obviously digress. However, feel free to watch Adam Curtis's Bitter Lake. It's a 2015 BBC documentary that I love. The point is, we should make it a habit to formally consider the effects of our technology use before simply using it. UAB's President Ray Watts circulated an email in which he listed the various principles that should guide our use of GenAI on campus. According to the principles, we should use GenAI in ways that serve our school's mission and that place humans at the center of deployment. In case you didn't know, and honestly I didn't know until I was reckoning with GenAI, the mission statement says, UAB serves students, patients, the community, and the global need for discovery, knowledge dissemination, education, creativity, and the application of groundbreaking solutions. Generative AI in particular is such a new tool. Unlike Google and online research databases, scholars, teachers, researchers, and writers have yet to coalesce ideas about what constitutes best practices with this tool. This means that, at least for now, in these early days of GenAI, it's your job to think through how and why you'll use this tool. You may not be able to spin out every possible ethical implication of such a use, but you can at least reason out how to use it in a way that protects the truth and human agency as much as possible. Before I propose the protocol for best use, let's get clear on exactly what GenAI is. So, GenAI, and we'll be focusing on large language models, which are a subset of GenAI. So large language models are what fuels ChatGPT, Bard, Claude, etc. And Essentially, they are just really advanced next word prediction models trained on huge data sets. So imagine the way that you write an email on Microsoft Office. It will often predict the word that it thinks you will want to write after that. And that is what GenAI is doing. It is not thinking per se, it is using a ton of data, and this is some of the data that the ChatGPT 3 was trained on. So the Common Crawl data scraping from the years of 2016 to 2019, and then this other set of data. This is what trained ChatGPT 3, and basically they just have exponentially greater prediction abilities that can generate huge chunks of text and not just that next word or next couple of words. If you are interested in learning more about machine learning and the history of how ChatGPT came to be, this doesn't tackle the history of ChatGPT itself, but Brian Christian's book is amazing. It takes us through the entire 20th century and how machine learning came to be and how it has become embedded in a lot of our taken for granted kinds of systems, such as the system that decides parole, who does and does not get parole, and how many years of sentencing people get, including other things like who should be kept in a hospital when they have pneumonia, etc. So I took this slide from a presentation that I attended in Reno this summer at the Council for Writing Program Administrators Conference, and the presenters were from Auburn. And they said that large language models are large simply because the units of text are so many. So for GPT-3, they have 1.75 billion parameters of text, and in ChatGPT-4, that's up to about 1 trillion. And LLMs, they take all of this data and then they are able to respond using that as a model, but that data still had to be trained by human users. So it needed to exclude extremely violent and hateful data that you would obviously find on the 2016 to 2019 internet, etc. And to purge the data set of the darkest instances of violence, racism, hate speech, and more, OpenAI, which is the company that created ChatGPT, outsourced the work of labeling this material to the global south. In particular, they turned to Kenyan workers who made a very small amount of money, though relatively large for their particular region. Nevertheless, they did not provide mental health services for these people who were reviewing extremely dark material, and the Kenyan workers cut the contract early. They were not able to finish in a healthy way. So let's talk about some of the limitations of what GenAI, specifically LLMs, can do before I get into its capabilities. So when someone says there is a thinking being now, artificial intelligence is really a thinking thing, that's not the case because it is a prediction algorithm. So it takes all the data it has and it predicts what is most likely to come next. It's not interested in truth. It doesn't have a sense of truth. It can only predict what's next. However, whenever the output comes from the prompts that you give it and it synthesizes what you think the next word should be, the results often resemble thought. That being said, it does not have an internal state representation of the world. It only generates content based on training data and whatever data you then feed into it. And there are therefore limitations for some commercial and research uses, also limitations for incorporating dynamic information, and of course, private data. The biggest limitation to my mind is that these LLMs are absolutely not geared to generate truthful statements. They are geared to generate what they think you want to hear. So the output from LLMs often include hallucinations, which is complete nonsense or totally fabricated information. So you cannot trust what it puts out unless you verify it. For example, often if you ask for a reading list of materials for a scholarly project you're doing, it might create, and it has, in the case of many of my colleagues and myself, created citations for non-existent papers, but citations that look really, really real. So it has the name of an author in the field, it even has the name of a journal, but then the article itself was never published. Sometimes it responds irrationally. And, for example, many people have started to use this without knowing that it is not a truth centric tool. So there was a lawyer who was representing a client who sued an airline, and the airline claimed that the statute of limitations had run out for the case. And so the judge was going to dismiss the case, but the lawyer wrote an appeal and used ChatGPT and asked it for prior case law prior cases in which the defendants were able to override the statute of limitations. And so he had all of these previous cases that he presented to the lawyer. Those cases were false. And so he is in a lot of trouble right now. So other limitations is that it is incredibly risky to share certain information with the AI, because everything you enter into the prompt then gets taken up as part of the training material for the model itself. And so that means that whatever information you input is no longer private, it is shared with everyone. So a lot of Amazon code was being put into the prompting. And then Amazon workers and managers were starting to see, oh, why is our proprietary code appearing in all of these other places? And they realized it's because they started using these open AI systems, and then they had to stop that very quickly. So what can these machines do? Well, the thing is that whatever it cannot do today is going to be what it can do likely tomorrow. So there are lots of improvements continuously made to this tool. ChatGPT 3.5 right now is a free tool. ChatGPT 4 has a lot more training data that it's been fed, and it has the capability of using these things called plugins. So it enhances the ability of those AI quite in a big way. So all of these things it can do, it can generate ideas and brainstorm, it can summarize research, it can translate. That's an incredible thing that it can do, even better than Google Translate. It can do sentiment and tone analysis. It can even analyze images. It can make some usable code. It can produce a ton of different texts, student essays, policy statements, genres of professional communication, a lot of creative writing kinds of documents. It can also learn to write in a specific voice. So if you prompt, the part of the prompting is going to be including saying what kind of grade level you might want to have it write in, what type of a tone, and a lot more. And there are lots of resources online about how to start making it write in your specific voice. And then, of course, when we have ChatGPT 4, we're going to have access to all of these plugins. So think of ChatGPT as kind of like your smartphone, and the plugins as the apps that you put on that. These are these additional kind of things that allow you to increase the capacity of the AI. So one that I think is really important is, for example, Link Reader. You are going to be able to give it access to PDFs of different documents you might want it to write about or give you information about. Lots of other things of this nature. These are just some that are coming up. VoxScript is going to be incredible. So it enables searching of YouTube transcripts. And so you're going to be able to ask the AI to compose about specific YouTube videos, not having to create those transcripts yourself. So this is going to seriously increase the capability of these AI. So here's the protocol I'm asking you to carry out for all the tasks in this course. You see how big this tool is. You see how many things it can do, but you also notice that there are a ton of risks for this. And I would encourage you to look at, especially for the field of English, the MLA and 4C's working group on AI. They put out a report about the various risks and benefits to the field of English. There are tons of ways that this is going to create problems, as we discussed, and also open up some opportunities. So in light of that, I am asking you, For every time you sit down to perform an activity or an assignment, I'd like you to go through a 2-part process in which you consider why you might use AI on the particular task, and if so, how you will use it. And so there are some formal steps for each part. So I want you to begin by asking why you might use GenAI. And the following questions come from Sydney Dobrin's book on teaching in an age of GenAI. So these questions are composed for students and working on assignments. However, I find them applicable to most writing situations. So for each task, we need to ask ourselves most of these questions. You can substitute boss or workplace for teacher and school, and perhaps job and task for assignment. But what you do is you say, okay, get clear on the purpose of what the assignment is, and then think about the assignment or task. Using GenAI, does that allow you to get the benefit of doing the task if it's school, or does it give you some kind of advantage when you're actually using it to compose something for a task? Is it going to save you time? And if it does, what do you gain and lose in that time save? How does using GenAI limit your possibilities? Maybe GenAI isn't the right tool. Maybe it's a combination of tools, or maybe you need to look simply at a search engine for that kind of research stuff. And then, of course, are there any ethical things that are popping up at you as for why you might not want to or need to use this tool, especially if it conflicts with academic integrity policies or ethics policies in your workplace? So the first step of deciding if you're going to use GenAI is going through these questions and getting clear on the answer for that, for yourself, for that specific purpose and context of the task and assignment. The next step is going to be, if you do choose, if your why protocol responds with, yes, there is a good reason to use this tool, you need to reckon with exactly how you will use it. So you may not use this particular sort of diagram here. However, it gives you a lot of ideas for the different levels and different ways you might actually go about using it. So obviously you can use it to compose, to draft, right? But you can also use it for finding information, and you can also use it for sort of thinking through and synthesizing ideas and thoughts. For each of these different tasks, you can rely on this in a lower or higher way. So you might think that in the writing process, you actually want to do most of the drafting, but you want to throw it into AI at the end to ask it to edit and proofread and give you suggestions for better structure. Now, you might not want to take those, but you might want to see what it has to say. So on the how protocol, this is one thing you might go to think through what are the different ways I might use it and what makes most sense for this task. But perhaps the most important part of the how protocol is this. You're going to need to think through how using GenAI intervenes in the writing process. And if you do not follow these additional steps, and again, I just created this in the summer, we're going to continue to add more elements to this as we go. You may not be composing responsibly using AI if you don't think through all the ways it changes your writing process. So you've likely been taught something about the writing process while in your many years as a student. So scholars of writing studies understand the writing process to involve conceptually distinct phases. So they are, in concept, they're different from one another. So the pre-writing phase or the brainstorming phase is different from the kind of the research. Those are interchangeable. But then the drafting phase is distinct from the revision phase. The revision phase is distinct from the editing phase. So there are all these distinct phases. However, we also recognize that the process does not unfold linearly. In fact, it is a recursive process in which you bounce from one step or phase to another. Maybe you go from, researching to drafting, but then you have to go back to research. And then once you've done that a little bit, you move to a revision stage. Maybe you've edited it, but then you go back to research and do some more drafting. So you see how these things kind of overlap on one another. I contend that several considerations arise for each distinct step of the writing process if we choose to use GenAI. So for the pre-writing or the research phase, you are going to need to determine the level of support you're going to want for your project. And then the pre-writing stage really, I think, is partly crafting a very good prompt for you then to use GenAI to do the drafting of your actual composition. So next, you'll have to do the drafting stage. And whereas this looks a little different when you're not using GenAI, if you're using GenAI in a more intense way, you will have to put that original prompt in and then generate the result. And then best practice that we've sort of thought through, at least a little bit so far, is to regenerate the response at least twice. So you want to see what your different results are there. Once you've got that basic vanilla draft, you are going to want to modify those prompts to see, okay, something is missing. I didn't quite get everything. There's more to the story here. And you will likely need to regenerate again. This could go on quite a while. So then if you're thinking about the revision stage, this is where things are going to be quite different from the revising that you do normally. Likely you will need to add a lot of information, especially if it's sensitive data that you could not feed the prompt originally in order to protect it from the sort of becoming part of the language model. You're going to need to potentially put in some primary research information. You will likely need to do at least some adjustment of the voice to fit the needs of your project. You're also this is huge. These two things are very big because just because GenAI gives you this particular kind of structure does not mean that that is the best structure. In fact, it might be relevant, and this is something we need to continue to play with. It might be relevant to, in your pre-writing stage, to actually sketch out what you think a good structure might be, or maybe even in the drafting stage, sketch out a decent structure and then compare that structure with what you actually get out of the GenAI, and then negotiate how you're going to revise to make it the clearest and best structure for your purposes. You'll also probably need to add some real big structural cues. We're going to talk a little bit about this and how we want to design our documents to be as maximally reader-friendly as possible. That's something that might be limited in these AI. Finally, this is huge. If you're using GenAI to do any kind of composition, you have to absolutely check for data truthfulness, because we know that one of the big limitations of AI is that it does not have a concern or even a way to access truth. It is not thinking based off of what it knows to be true. It is predicting. And of course, it hallucinates. So if the AI is making claims that you have not given it, you are going to have to verify all of those. And furthermore, add citations for those claims. Then finally, editing for concision and clarity at the sentence level, which it may do well, but we don't know. There are lots of other ways that you might do it better. So you'll notice that while using GenAI might help eliminate some of the work of drafting, it adds other steps and actions to your writing process that might take a considerable amount of time. So it may be that as you get started using this tool, it will take more time to compose with it. That is especially true if your prompts are non-specific or if you do not give the AI much information and you rely on the machine to produce that information. So if you've done very little research on the front end and you go to AI specifically, you're going to have a lot of work to do to verify the information and the data. In order to compose responsibly, you'll have to check each of the claims and add citations. Perhaps for some tasks, it's easier to spend more time on the prompting, more time feeding the AI information that you gathered during your research, but perhaps the information you need to write about is sensitive or risky, and you shouldn't share with the AI because it is protected by state or federal laws such as FERPA or HIPAA, or it is simply work that you do not want others to access until it's published. I assure you, I'd rather not learn about how to use this technology. It's not something that's that intrinsically interesting to me. But the thing is, you notice that our readings emphasize the need to understand this and begin developing best practices for yourself in order to A, remain competitive on the job market, and B, have a good sense that comes from you of when it is reasonable and when it is unreasonable to use the tool. We will never know until we play around and develop our own processes. So I am really a doom and gloom kind of person. Can you tell? It's really unfortunate. I wish I were better. But when it comes to these shifts in technology, I'm kind of a Luddite. However, I really respect and understand the more optimistic perspectives that a lot of students brought to this discussion. So I really challenge you to take the information that you've learned here and feel empowered to start playing around with this tool. However, at least while you are learning how to use it, please go through the two-step protocol each time you consider turning to GenAI for a task. This might feel like extra sort of busy work, but I assure you it is not. Because it is only over time and through thinking through this clearly that your process will become more fixed. At present, though, we just have to be extra mindful about how to be responsible users of these AI.